Hi everyone, in this video we're going to talk about this exclusive Lochindaal 10-year-old release. Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel, and this is a bit of a different video to normal. We're talking about a whiskey that's only £150 and it is a Lochindaal 2010 10-year-old, and it's an exclusive release for us, so we're the only people that are going to be selling these bottles, and they're available on the shop right now and they're priced at £150, which is pretty affordable really. Now there's a few obvious questions that need addressing about this bottling. So the first one obviously is, what on earth is Lochindaal? Well, Lochindaal can refer to one of three things. It's a lock or a sea lock on Islay, which is sort of near where the Bruichladdich distillery is located. It's also a distillery that operated from the 19th and early 20th century called Lochindaal, which was also named Port Charlotte, which was also named Rins. Now, any Bruichladdich fans in there will recognise those names because Lochindaal, Port Charlotte and Rins are also trademarks that belong to the Bruichladdich distillery that refer to types of whiskey that they produce, and the name infers a different level of peating in the whiskey. So when we're dealing with peating in whiskey, we're looking at ppm, or parts per million. And what are those parts per million that we're measuring? Well, they're phenols. Now, phenols are a group of chemical molecules. So when you're tasting peat, you're not actually tasting the physical peat itself. The barley is dried using peat, and the peat smoke clings to the outside of the barley, which stays present through the whiskey production process. Now, ppm refers to the level of peating or phenolic parts per million that are present on the barley after the malting's complete, and that level continues to drop through the whiskey making process. Now, with the Bruichladdich releases that we've talked about, Bruichladdich have a number of tiers of products. So Bruichladdich itself, the classic laddie and things like that, that's almost 0 ppm. Rins is the second highest, or the second lowest, and that's only got 30 parts per million. Port Charlotte, which a lot of you have probably enjoyed, and it's a really fantastic whiskey, Port Charlotte, that's 40 parts per million, which is about comparable with Ardbeg, I think. Lochindaal is 50 parts per million, and then of course you've got Octomore, which is the world's heaviest peated whiskey, which is anywhere from 80 to 309, I think, parts per million. So this is at the very super heavily peated end of the spectrum. So if you don't like your peated whiskey, don't go buying this bottle of whiskey, because it's a very, very heavily peated whiskey. Now, what's interesting with the ppm, or the phenolic parts per million, this peat level, it continues to decline as soon as the whiskey making process has started. So you lose a lot of the peated influence as you're going through the production process, but then also through maturation as well. And this is only a 10-year-old whiskey, but when you look at Octomore, you'll also find that a lot of that is bottled very young, 3, 5, 10 years. It's very bottled at a very young age, and that's to keep that phenolic content very high, because the longer that maturation period, the lesser the peat influence. And obviously if you're buying Lochindaal or Octomore, you really want a big punch of peat. So now we know about the type of whiskey that's in this bottle. The next sort of thing to talk about is the provenance, because this has got quite a unique provenance to it. In terms of, if you look on the back label here, it's an official Bruichladdich bottling. So it's bottled by the Bruichladdich distillery, and it's actually from a private cask. So on the back here it says private single cask bottling. So how on earth do you get a cask of Bruichladdich? Well, it's quite simple. You get this leaflet, you look inside and you think, oh gosh, right, I'll buy a fresh sherry hogshead of Bruichladdich for £1,100. What you're going to do is fill in this form and send it back to the distillery. Now, unfortunately, there is one other thing that you'll need, and that's a time machine, because this is from the inaugural distillations in 2001. So those of you not familiar with the Bruichladdich distillery, it was owned by a lot of different people over the years. I think Invergordon owned it for a period, White and Mackay owned it for a period, and then it was actually closed down in 1995. So it went through a big chain of ownership. It was often used just for bulk production to go into blends, so the wood selection was not normally the best, and then it eventually sort of faded out and closed in 1995. at the end of the 2000s, a group of private investors led by Mark Rainier. Now, Mark Rainier is interesting because he was originally from La Reserve. So La Reserve was a wine investment company down in London, I believe, but they also sold casks of Springbank and Ardbeg. So all of the private, or many of the privately owned Springbanks and Ardbegs that were brought to the market were actually sold through Mark, through La Reserve. And if you can find the marketing material from that time, it's really fascinating how they describe it. But Mark opened the distillery and they appointed Jim McEwen as the master distiller. And ever since, the whiskies had sort of like a massive cult status. But when they took over the distillery, all the buildings, a lot of the equipment was all massively outdated and in massive need of repair. So how do you get money if you're sat on not a huge amount of stock and you're starting to produce whiskey again? You do a cask ownership scheme. You sell casks to the public. You know, if you sell 1,000 casks at £1,500 a go, you've got a decent amount of revenue, working capital that you can do. So this cask was bought by the original owner in 2010, and then they had it bottled in 2021 as a 10-year-old whiskey. And then of course Bruichladdich put these labels on the back. Now, when we get to the front label, you'll see that it's got quite an attractive label on it. Now, this is what makes this offering unique, I think, in some ways. It's got an artwork, or this front label is being designed by Kirsty Johnson, who's the niece of the person who owns this cask. Now, she graduated from Edinburgh College of Art in 2020, and she's like an illustrator, and she produced this amazing label for this bottling, and it really is quite attractive. Now, to coincide with this release, because I think this artwork is absolutely stunning, I think it's really, really nice, Kirsty, we've done a limited edition print that will be sold or given away with each of the bottles. So as well as you bottle for your £150, you also get a signed limited edition print of this artwork. Now, that's important to note, because if you're the sort of person who buys a bottle of whiskey and complains because there's a little crease in it, don't buy this release. There are lots of these labels have small creases or air pockets on there, but it's 150 quid. This is fantastic whiskey for drinking, as we'll get onto in a minute, but don't buy this because it's an immaculate presentation in terms of the bottle. The artwork is the collectible product in this release, if that makes sense. The whiskey, 150 quid whiskey, is there to be enjoyed and consumed. So as you know, I don't do tasting notes on this video, so in a moment I'm going to hand over to Phil Dwyer from Whisky Wednesday. He's the manager of the Whisky Shop in Manchester, and if you've not watched his channel, go and watch it. Loads of fantastic tasting note reviews and videos on his channel. If you want to figure out what this whiskey is like, because believe me, it's absolutely sensational whiskey, I'm going to pass over to Phil and he can fill you in on all of the whiskey details.
Hello everyone, my name is Phil and I'm here to talk to you today about this wonderful bottle of Lochindaal whiskey. Lochindaal, Baby Octomore, private bottling at 62.7%. If you are drinking this with me, or indeed just contemplating buying one, I cannot stress enough how important it is to let this whiskey rest in the glass. This has been in mine for around 20 minutes. Tried a small sample in the past. Please let it sit, because you will experience one of the most full-bodied noses of a whiskey I've ever had in my entire life. But let's jump into it and smell. It's honestly just endless. It's all the smoke and peat you could ever want, but it is backed up by white chocolate, caramelized white chocolate. It smells like a bowl of melted chocolate. There's custard, there's banana, there's little brown sugary notes throughout the whole thing. These beautiful waves of sea salt kind of crashing against the sweetness of it all. This was cask number 4297. It's one of the best individual bourbon casks I've ever come across in my life, as far as single casks go. Whatever that barrel is doing now is going to be providing some magic. Gentle start. You would almost be fooled into thinking that this isn't 62.7%, but the longer you hold on the palate, the more impressive it becomes. Starts off sweet, all those banana-y notes, those chocolate notes, that white chocolate as well. Kind of coats your mouth and makes you go, oh, there's no smoke, there's no spice. Let it build, roll it around. In comes these like pine, rosemary, sagey notes. this beautiful ending of like freshly cut grass, like walking through freshly cut grass on like a beautiful summer's day. That is rinsing around my mouth right now. The oiliness of the texture of it. I did the official tasting notes in the brochure, but it feels like my tongue is stuck to the roof of my mouth through sheer viscosity. And it just rolls and becomes this big, robust West Coast dream. The finish starts up here and it gently falls into these beautiful cut grass notes, as I was saying. I get the barley, I taste like the caramel and the vanilla and the toffee from the bourbon barrel. The saltiness is wonderful, it's classic Bruichladdich. This is up there with the top 2 peated whiskies I've ever tried. This is number 2. Number 1 is a Lagavulin 12-year-old from 2017. This is so close to that. Just incredible. One of the best peated whiskies I've ever tried. But yeah, I hope you will enjoy it. I'll see you soon.
So there we have it, it's the 2010 Lochindaal release, exclusively available on our shop. The link's down below if you want to buy it. It comes with the limited edition print, it's $149 including shipping, and you're gonna have to be quick because we've only got 60 of these left to sell.